In the echoing halls of Buckingham Palace, a single sentence from King Charles III left the world in stunned silence. It wasn't about politics or power, but about faith. For decades, whispers surrounded his fascination with Islam, its art, its philosophy, its heart. But when the king finally spoke openly, his words carried the weight of truth, reverence, and humility. What could drive one of the most powerful men on earth to speak so tenderly of a faith misunderstood by so many? Tonight we uncover the story behind King Charles' shocking statement about Islam. My friends, I've learned through years of seeing people at their best and worst that compassion is the bridge between hearts. Tonight's story is not about crowns or kingdoms. It's about understanding. King Charles has long been known for his curiosity about different cultures, but what he revealed recently touched the very soul of humanity. It's a reminder that truth and faith aren't bound by titles. They're written in our actions, our respect, and our humility. So let's journey together through a moment of reflection and perhaps revelation. Long before he wore the crown, Charles was not just a prince of the British monarchy, he was a seeker. Amidst the royal duties, political formalities, and endless ceremonies, there existed within him a quiet yearning to understand the world beyond his own walls. Those who knew him closely spoke of a young man deeply curious about the essence of life, about faith, balance, and the invisible thread that connects humanity to the divine. It was during his travels through the Middle East many decades ago that something within him began to stir. Surrounded by the intricate beauty of Islamic architecture, he found himself captivated not only by the art but by the soul behind it. He saw in the designs of mosques and palaces something profoundly different, a reflection of order, symmetry, and purpose. The delicate calligraphy inscribed on the walls didn't merely speak of beauty, they spoke of remembrance, dhikr, the constant awareness of God. Charles later described Islamic art as a reflection of the divine harmony that underlies creation. Those weren't empty words. They came from someone who had observed deeply, someone who recognized that beauty in Islam wasn't ornamental, it was spiritual. Each curve, each pattern, was a symbol of the eternal truth that everything in existence points back to its creator. As his understanding deepened, he began studying Islamic philosophy, history, and even its environmental teachings. He was especially drawn to the writings of Islamic scholars who spoke of stewardship, the idea that humans are guardians of the earth, not its owners. In this, he found a connection to his lifelong passion for nature and sustainability. He would later say that Islamic principles of balance and care for creation were wisdoms long forgotten in the modern world. It was as though he had discovered in Islam an echo of the same values he had always cherished: respect for creation, humility before the Creator, and a sense of responsibility to protect what has been entrusted to us. There's something deeply moving about a man of immense privilege humbling himself before truth. In a world that often separates faiths, divides people by creed and custom, King Charles, even as a young prince, looked for unity. He saw in Islam not something foreign or distant, but something familiar, something pure. He once attended a traditional recitation of the Quran and remarked on the rhythm and peace it brought to the listeners. It felt, he said, as though the words themselves were breathing life into the air. For someone raised in the corridors of power, that humility, to listen, to learn, and to revere another faith's beauty, spoke volumes about his heart. This fascination was not a passing curiosity or political gesture. It was a personal awakening, one that continued quietly through the years. He began collecting Islamic texts, reading works on Sufism, and engaging in interfaith dialogues not for show, but for understanding. Those close to him recall how he often spoke about the spiritual essence of Islam, describing it as a way of seeing the divine presence in all things. That phrase alone reveals how deeply it touched him. What began as admiration for art evolved into respect for belief, and eventually in a reverence for the principles that guide a billion souls around the world: justice, mercy, compassion. These were not foreign ideas to him. They were universal truths that resonated with his own moral compass. And though he never claimed Islam as his faith, he carried its lessons in his heart like quiet wisdom. In that sense, his fascination was never about boundaries. It was about bridges. It was in these early years that the foundation was laid for what would one day become his most surprising and heartfelt statement. A moment when admiration turned into acknowledgement, and curiosity became conviction. King Charles' early fascination with Islam was not simply a study of another religion. It was a journey toward understanding the shared light that shines through all of faith's windows. Different colors, one divine source. The moment arrived quietly, almost unexpectedly. King Charles stood before a diverse audience of scholars, religious leaders, and diplomats gathered for an interfaith conference. The room was still, the kind of stillness that precedes words destined to linger long after they're spoken. The air carried a weight of anticipation, for few knew exactly what the monarch was about to say. When he began to speak, his voice was calm, measured, and sincere. He spoke not as a ruler, but as a man reflecting on truth. Islam, he said slowly, teaches us to live in harmony with the world, and that is something we must all learn again. Those words, simple as they were, rippled across the hall like a sudden breeze through a forest. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncertain. Yet everyone could sense the gravity in his tone. It wasn't a rehearsed statement. It was conviction, a reflection of decades spent studying, listening, and admiring the essence of a faith too often misunderstood. The king went on to describe how Islam's core teachings, compassion, balance, and justice, mirror the universal values that humanity needs now more than ever. He spoke about how modern society, in its race for progress, had lost touch with spiritual equilibrium. We have learned to build, he said, but forgotten how to belong. We have mastered technology but lost the art of mercy. It wasn't the kind of speech that sought applause. Instead, it sought understanding. His words came from a place of respect, not conversion, not endorsement, but a genuine acknowledgement of beauty where he found it. He praised how the Quran calls believers to reflect upon nature, to treat it not as a possession but as a sacred trust. He reminded the audience that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught kindness even toward animals, mercy even toward enemies, and fairness even in judgment. It was this spiritual nobility, he said, that the modern world so desperately needed to revive. As his voice filled the room, the cameras captured a man speaking from the heart. There was no hint of politics, no royal posture, only a deep humility. Faith, he continued, is not meant to divide us. It is meant to remind us that we are all custodians of the same creation. He paused for a moment, allowing silence to settle like gentle rain after a storm. And then, in words that would later make headlines around the world, he concluded, if we wish to save this world, we must learn again what Islam has long taught, that mercy and balance are not luxuries but necessities. That line, that one sentence, resonated deeply with those who listened. It was, as many described it later, a moment of truth. For some, it was shocking that the King of England, defender of the Anglican faith, would speak so openly in reverence of Islamic teachings. But for others, it was healing. It bridged a divide between faiths, showing that understanding is not betrayal, it is courage. In that single statement, King Charles accomplished something few world leaders ever manage. He humanized the conversation around Islam. He didn't speak about Muslims as a distant group. He spoke with them, with empathy, with admiration, and with sincerity. His words reflected the very principles Islam cherishes: truth spoken with dignity, compassion shared without fear, and perhaps that is why they touched so many hearts. For King Charles, the moment wasn't about shock. It was about honesty. After decades of quiet study, he could no longer keep silent about what he believed the world needed most: a return to spiritual balance. His statement was not an endorsement of doctrine, but a reminder of values, mercy, respect, humility, that transcend faith and define humanity. And as he stepped away from the podium, the world saw not just a monarch addressing a crowd, but a man inviting humanity to rediscover its soul. The aftermath of King Charles' statement unfolded like waves on a restless sea, calm at first, but soon rippling into storms of reaction. The media seized upon his words, headlines blazing with phrases like "King praises Islam" and "A monarch's surprising admiration." Around the world, people reacted with astonishment, curiosity, and, in some quarters, disapproval. Supporters called his speech courageous, a rare act of honesty in an age of caution. But critics questioned his intentions, accusing him of overstepping royal neutrality. Amidst the noise and confusion, one truth stood out clearly. His words had struck a chord that reached deep into the soul of global faith and dialogue. Yet through all the commentary, Charles himself remained still, calm, and composed. He neither defended nor retracted his statement. He allowed his words to speak for themselves, as truth often does when it is spoken from the heart. In private conversations that followed, he explained that faith, in its purest form, is never about dominance or conversion. It is about understanding. We cannot build bridges, he said softly, by shouting across rivers. It was a sentence that carried the wisdom of age and the humility of someone who has spent years observing humanity's divisions and yearning for its healing. The backlash revealed something deeper, not just about religion, but about how fearful people can be of empathy. Many struggled to accept that admiration for another faith's teachings could coexist with one's own beliefs. Yet King Charles' words reflected a truth found in Islam itself. To you your religion and to me mine. It was not about changing faiths, but about respecting the sacredness in each. And that, in essence, is what Islam has always taught, that tolerance, respect, and coexistence are not modern ideals, but divine commands. In the days that followed, scholars of all backgrounds began discussing his remarks. Some pointed out how his words echoed the Islamic concept of adil, justice, not as punishment, but as fairness rooted in mercy. Others saw in him the reflection of a leader willing to speak for unity, when it would have been easier to remain silent. Even those who disagreed with his approach could not deny the courage it took to speak those words before a watching world. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson in all of it, that truth, when spoken sincerely, will always stir the world. Islam teaches that intention defines the value of action. If a word is spoken with good intention, even if misunderstood, it remains pure in the eyes of God. King Charles seemed to understand that principle instinctively. His intention was not to challenge faith, but to honor it, to remind a fractured humanity that mercy and understanding are not signs of weakness, but of strength. In the end, the backlash faded, but the message remained. For those who listened beyond the headlines, there was something quietly beautiful in his example, that a man surrounded by power chose instead the language of humility, that a monarch who could have remained silent chose instead to speak of harmony. And in that, his words became more than a statement. They became a reflection of a universal truth found in every faith, that hearts are not won by might or by argument, but by compassion. The days following King Charles's statement were unlike anything the royal palace had seen in decades. His words, spoken with sincerity and reverence, became the center of global debate. Newspapers across continents carried his quote in bold. Islam teaches us to live in harmony with the world. And that is something we must all learn again. Some called it visionary, others labeled it controversial. But one thing was undeniable. The king had touched a nerve that lay deep within the heart of modern civilization. In a world fractured by misunderstanding, his simple acknowledgement of Islamic values became both a spark of hope and a target of criticism. Political commentators dissected his motives. Religious leaders offered interpretations, both kind and critical. Some accused him of overstepping the boundaries of royal neutrality, while others praised him for speaking truth in a time when silence was easier. Within the palace, advisors debated whether his words should be clarified or retracted. Yet through all of this noise, King Charles remained calm, serene even. He neither defended nor justified what he had said. Instead, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his heart was clean. When asked privately about the backlash, he responded softly, "Faith is not about conversion, it is about connection." Those words reflected the core of his belief, that faith, in all its forms, was meant to unite, not divide. His statement wasn't a declaration of change, but an acknowledgement of beauty. He saw Islam not through the lens of fear or politics, but through the eyes of understanding. And in doing so, he followed one of Islam's greatest moral lessons: sincerity. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that deeds are judged by intentions, and King Charles' intention was clear: to build bridges where walls had long stood. The backlash also revealed something powerful about society. It showed how easily admiration can be mistaken for allegiance, and how fragile tolerance can be in a world filled with suspicion. Yet it also revealed who listened with open hearts. Across the Muslim world, people expressed gratitude for his words. Scholars quoted him in lectures, calling his statement a rare moment of truth from a leader of the West. Even among those who disagreed with him, there was quiet respect for the courage it took to speak so plainly about faith. King Charles' reflection on the criticism was deeply human. In one of his later interviews, he remarked, "If respect for another's faith causes discomfort, then perhaps it is not the faith that needs questioning, but our fear of understanding." It was a statement that echoed the wisdom found in the Quran. "We made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another." For him, these weren't just poetic lines. They were a moral compass. He believed that every faith carried within it a light meant to guide humanity toward compassion, not competition. And so, while the world argued, he remained true to his conviction that recognizing the beauty in another's belief does not weaken one's own, but strengthens one's humanity. Through the storm of opinions, the king's stillness spoke louder than the noise. He had reminded the world of something timeless, that true faith is not a banner we raise above others, but a bridge we build toward them. In the months that followed, King Charles continued to speak with quiet reverence about the values he found inspiring within Islam. And one word appeared again and again in his reflections: mercy. He often said that in all his years of study and observation, what struck him most was how the Islamic tradition begins every chapter of its holy book with the words, "In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful." To him, those weren't simply phrases of ritual. They were a declaration of what the world has forgotten, that mercy is the very essence of strength. He would later share, "If our decisions, our justice, and our governance lack mercy, then we have learned nothing from faith." Those words revealed a truth that transcended religion, a truth rooted in humanity. King Charles spoke often about mercy not as a soft emotion, but as a divine principle, one that holds societies together when power and pride threaten to tear them apart. He compared it to the work of a judge who must balance law with compassion, firm in justice, yet open to understanding. It was in that same spirit that he once reflected on the Prophet Muhammad's peace be upon him, teaching that God will not show mercy to one who does not show mercy to others. The king's voice trembled slightly as he quoted those words before a small gathering, adding that such a message should be etched in the heart of every leader. In his eyes, mercy was not weakness, it was the highest form of wisdom. He saw how the modern world, with its wars, divisions, and endless competition, had drifted away from that virtue. "We've built systems," he said once, "that reward the loud and forget the kind." For him, mercy was the antidote to arrogance, a reminder that greatness is not measured by dominance but by gentleness. His message echoed the Quranic vision of justice, not cold or mechanical but infused with compassion. As Islam teaches, my mercy encompasses all things. To Charles, this verse was not merely theology, it was a call to humanity to heal its heart. And perhaps more than anything, mercy was what defined his approach to faith itself. He admired how in Islam mercy is not just between God and man, but between people, in how they speak, forgive, and treat one another. He once described watching a Muslim man in prayer and noticing the calm in his eyes afterward. It was as though, the king said, he had let go of the world and found peace in forgiving it. That observation stayed with him for years, a reminder that mercy begins not with governments or kings, but within the quiet hearts of ordinary people. In his reflections, one could sense a longing, a hope that the world would rediscover mercy as the foundation of coexistence. His admiration wasn't about embracing a different faith, but about recognizing shared divine values that bind all faiths together. In Islam, mercy is infinite and forgiveness is power. In his heart, King Charles understood the truth deeply, and so when he spoke about compassion, it wasn't theory, it was testimony. He believed that only through mercy could humanity reclaim its lost soul, and in that belief, he reflected the same light Islam has carried for centuries, the light of a merciful creator who calls his creation to be merciful too. As time passed, the echo of King Charles' words began to settle into something more profound, a quiet legacy. For many, he was no longer just a monarch bound by royal tradition. He had become a voice of reflection, a symbol of understanding in a world often blinded by division. What began as admiration for the beauty of Islam's teachings had evolved into something far deeper, a call for unity rooted in respect. The king's life, marked by privilege and power, now carried a softer light, one that shone not from his crown but from his heart. He spoke less about faith as identity and more about faith as responsibility. In interviews and private dialogues, he often said, "Our titles, our positions, our wealth, none of it defines who we are before God. Only our actions do." It was a statement that resonated deeply, reflecting the Quranic truth that the most noble of you in the sight of God is the one most righteous. To him, this was the essence of humility, the idea that greatness is measured not in worldly status, but in sincerity and service. And perhaps that is what moved people most, the realization that a man born into privilege chose to speak the language of equality. He reminded the world that faith, in its purest form, does not seek dominance, it seeks understanding. The king's message was not about Islam alone, but about the shared moral fabric that ties every faith to the other: compassion, justice, mercy, forgiveness. "We may wear different crowns of belief," he said once, "but before the Almighty, we bow as equals." It was a truth simple yet revolutionary, that no amount of power can elevate a soul and no lack of it can diminish one. In his later years, King Charles began supporting more interfaith projects, often bringing together Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars to discuss peace and coexistence. Those who attended said he listened more than he spoke, a rare quality in a leader. His humility reflected a quiet understanding of Islam's teaching that listening is an act of wisdom. He sought to show by example that respect is not weakness, it is the strongest form of leadership. And in that, he reminded the world of a timeless Islamic principle, that a true leader is a servant first. As the years unfolded, his shocking statement became less of a controversy and more of a legacy, a bridge between worlds. People began to see his words not as an act of boldness, but as an act of truth. He had dared to say aloud what many silently felt, that the values of Islam are not foreign. They are foundational. They are the same values that elevate every soul, regardless of race, creed, or crown. And so, when history remembers King Charles, perhaps it will not be for his royal title or the grandeur of his throne, but for something far more enduring, his courage to speak with the heart. His story teaches us what Islam itself teaches so beautifully, that wisdom is not in separation, but in understanding, not in pride, but in humility. For in the end, all crowns fade, all power passes, but truth, compassion, and mercy remain eternal. And so, my friends, as we close tonight's reflection, let us remember that truth often comes not with thunder, but with grace. King Charles' words were not meant to divide faiths, but to remind us of the beauty that unites them, the shared heartbeat of mercy, compassion, and humility. In his journey, we see the lesson Islam so often teaches, that no soul is higher than another, and that understanding is itself an act of worship. It doesn't take a crown to honor faith, only sincerity. It doesn't take power to build peace, only courage. Perhaps that is the deeper message behind the King's statement, that when a leader dares to speak of mercy in a world of judgment, he reflects something greater than himself, the divine light that shines in every heart willing to see. So tonight, as you turn away from this story, I invite you to carry one thought with you, that respect, empathy, and love are not the signs of one faith, but of all faith. Because at the end of every story, every life, and every prayer, we all return to the same Creator. This is Judge Frank Caprio thanking you for listening and reminding you, justice with mercy is the highest form of faith. Until next time, may peace be upon you.